Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast.
The API and drug substance market is going through a period of real disruption. Reshoring pressures, geopolitical uncertainty, and a shifting competitive landscape are forcing pharma companies, biotech, and CDMOs to rethink supply chains that took decades to build and can't be changed overnight. Jan Ramakers has been tracking the fine chemicals and pharmaceutical ingredients market for over 2 decades through his independent consultancy. He works with companies across pharma, agrochemicals, and the financial sector, covering everything from market intelligence and competitor analysis to M&A due diligence. In this episode, we dig into where the API outsourcing market actually stands right now, what's driving consolidation and specialization among CDMOs, and how companies are navigating supply chain pressures in a volatile political environment. Jan, thank you for joining me.
You're welcome.
Yeah, great to sit across from someone for once, rather than over a screen. Start by telling me a bit about your background and what you do in your consultancy.
Well, my background is I'm a chemist by training, but that's a long time ago. Then I joined DSM in 1980, worked for them in R&D, then went to marketing, business research. Then in 96, I joined Wood Mackenzie Consultants based in Edinburgh, Scotland. I moved to Scotland for that. I built up a fine chemicals consulting practice for them. And I left them again in 1999 to set up my own business in Scotland, initially doing pure market research, but that quickly expanded to include due diligence and to include strategy and competitor analysis. I stayed in Scotland until the end of 2020 when we moved back to the Netherlands, and I'm now continuing my business from here, from the Netherlands, doing the same thing. And I've worked with companies from very small to the largest companies. There are chemical companies, both in pharma as well as in agrochemicals and other fine chemical intermediates. I've worked for a couple of governments, including the Dutch government, helping companies in developing countries to become competitive and export to Europe in that case. I did that for pharma as well. So I'm involved in a couple of other things, bits and pieces, including M&A companies where I participate in due diligence on a quite regular basis. That's me in a nutshell.
In a nutshell, that's very busy and varied career. So let's get on to APIs then. When you look at the API outsourcing market today, what are the headlines?
First of all, as you said, there's a lot going on. There's a lot of chaos at the moment in the market, which is caused by all sorts of things, not least the current administration in the USA, where people or the administration starts viewing pharma and vaccines and all that sort of stuff in quite differently from the usual approach, I would say, to say the least. The trade war, all the tariffs that are being applied and then changed again, and you know that creates a lot of uncertainty. A lot of the industry has announced plans to invest in the States. Whether that's going to happen, yes or no, remains to be seen. So there's a lot of uncertainty about pricing, about the whole thing. It's a bit of a chaotic time from that perspective, from the regulatory perspective, specifically in the States, not as much in Europe and other areas. You know, what you see from the chemical point of view is that obviously there's a lot of biologicals in the market now, there's a lot in the development pipeline, but there are still, the majority of the development pipeline is still small molecules. It's just over 50%. So they're here to stay, and the CDMO industry obviously benefits from having lots of. Most of the CDMOs are doing small molecules, so they benefit from having those in the pipeline.
You said just over 50% is small molecules. What is the rest made up of?
Well, if you look at the drug development pipeline, last time I looked, which was not that long ago, I think it was about 52% of the products for small molecules. The remainder are biologicals. There's a lot of mRNA work going on. There's a lot of other biologicals which are being developed. And they are, if you look at the current market, then market value, then the value of the biologicals is high. Many of the leading pharma products are biologicals partly because they're very expensive. In terms of numbers of products, the small molecules are still making up, say, half, a bit more than half of the market. But they're, generally speaking, their value is a bit lower per molecule than the value of the biologicals. Something else happening, of course, has been happening for a couple of years, is that biologicals are going generic, i.e. it's not like in small molecules where you've got exactly the same molecule. In biologicals you get biosimilars, which are molecules which are roughly the same but not completely, and have a similar mode of a similar action. So that's the current market.
The patent cliff.
Yes, the patent cliff. We're just at the sort of coming towards the end of the second patent cliff. We've had a patent cliff, 10, 15 years ago. In terms of biologicals losing patent, that doesn't affect their pricing too much. If any small molecule that loses patent protection or exclusivity normally attracts quite a bit of generic manufacturing, and that drops the price significantly. If for a really, really blockbuster drug, it can be up to anything. The price drop can be up to 70-80%, and that's less so for biologicals.
Why is that?
Because they're not exactly the same structures. They're biosimilar. Sometimes actually the biosimilars are having a better performance than the original biological, and they're called biobetters then. So it's difficult to manufacture them anyway, whatever you do. So they tend to not lose that much of their value.
I see. That's really interesting. We've gone on a little bit of a tangent, so let's bring back to reshoring. It's been, because you mentioned it earlier, it's been talked about for years, but this, it's had quite a lot more attention recently, got a lot of headlines with, Trump's tariffs and policy changes. Is that actually happening, or is it mostly just talk at this point?
A lot of it has been talk, but it is happening. It's, I think it was happening because people were, not very happy sometimes about things they had done in the Far East, whether it be India, China, for various reasons, difficulties in communication. It's far away. It's if you really want to go there, it's not as easy as when your partner is around the corner. But it was up to a point. It was cheaper. It tended to be cheaper initially, and people thought that would be a good idea. Companies thought that would be a good idea. Then it sort of stalled a bit, and then Corona came, and because of all sorts of shutdowns and lockdowns, all of a sudden it was almost impossible to transport products from, say, China or India or wherever they were made to Europe or the States, and that made people, companies and governments realize that, hey, if something like this happens, we've got problems. So maybe we should produce essential drugs in-house or closer to home just for security of supply, and that's completely not connected to any political things or whatever. It's purely if the lines break down because of something like the pandemic, then you've got a problem. So you see that happening. You see it happening in India as well, where they got most of their APIs from China and were doing mainly formulation in India. That's changing, supported by the Indian government. The European Union has wants more products to be made here. The same is true in North America, in the USA. So that's the reshoring is happening, but it's not a very quick process, because if you've got a producer in China or in India, then you've got the registration includes that producer, and if you want to change it, then apart from long-term contracts which you tend to have, you need to adjust the registration, and so you need to. There's a lot of work, and it's taken a lot of money as well. So yes, it is happening, but it's not like tomorrow everything's going to be made here. Yeah.
Where are most APIs actually made currently? Can you give us a sort of a rough map about how that's split
Yes,
globally?
I think if you look at small molecules, mind you, biologicals as well, but if you look at small molecules, traditionally those were made in Europe, because that's where the fine chemical industry originated from in the, about 100 years ago. There was quite a bit in the USA until, I would say, maybe the early 90s, mid-90s, when quite a lot of US companies stopped producing fine chemicals. Some sites were taken over by European companies, even others. So if you look at the situation now, I would say, if you look at the CDMO industry as well, the majority is, I think it's, don't take me up on these figures, but I think it's maybe about 38% in Europe in terms of the sites that you have. There's about 500-600 CDMOs in this space, and together between them they've got about 2,500 sites, but manufacturing sites, and about 38, say 40% of those are in Europe. There is the rest of it is split between China, India, and North America, with China and India being quite significant as well. And if you look at types, it used to be mainly generics being produced outside Europe, i.e. in the Far East. That is still the case, but it's changing. There are originators now developing new drugs in China, for instance.
How realistic is it actually for companies to shift where they do source from? What would it actually take?
It takes, if you really want to take stuff home, you need to find a CDMO here, or you need to do it in-house. If you do it in-house, it's fine, it's all doable, but that means building a plant. And if you're a big pharma company, most big pharma companies don't necessarily want to be chemical companies. They want to be pharma companies, healthcare companies, if you like. Ideally, they want to have all the chemistry done outside by a specialist industry. It's changes, it gets more complicated, so it makes a lot of sense to have that done by somebody else who's a specialist in the field. So if you want to shift from, say, let's take China as an example, from a Chinese producer to a European producer, CDMO, then they need to accommodate the product, and in many cases that means they have to at least adjust their plants, because there's always been a lot of talk about multi-purpose plants and multi-product plants, but that's only true to a certain extent, because certainly with the newer drugs they are quite specialized plants, so whenever you take another product in, you need to adjust the plant. So that needs to be done, so this investment is required. The CDO might take that on the chin themselves, or they might want to share it with the client, and then the product has to be transferred, and it has to be validated. It has to be shown for the regulator to be the same product and to have the same characteristics, and you have to sort of you don't redo the registration, but you have to adjust it. And that takes trials, and it takes time, and it takes money. So it takes, I don't know how long it would take, but it could take anything up to a year maybe, or some cases even longer, depending on contracts and whatever is in place.
So how much has the regulatory environment actually moved the needle on this? Things like the EU Critical Medicines Act that was introduced recently.
That makes a difference because it focuses the attention on essential drugs that the European Union wants to be made in Europe, so that they're available even if the supply chains break down for whatever reason. Same is true for North America, for the States, where Trump wants everybody to produce everything in the States. I think that's unlikely to happen in the end, but it will focus companies on those areas. And it's the stricter the regulations are, the more that will happen, because they'll have to comply with that in the end.
So you've been tracking fine chemicals for a number of years now. How does this sort of current moment in history compare to other periods of disruption and other trends that you've seen throughout your career?
I think this one is it's more chaotic than. I mean, there was disruption during, say, the credit crunch, when all of a sudden there was not enough money. Investors didn't invest in the industry. They didn't invest in new developments, new products. Somebody at the time said to me, "We only invest," and this was a private equity company, said, "We now only invest in steel in the ground, where I can actually kick the plant physically rather than IP and a promise." I think we're not in a situation like that now. It's more the extreme, almost extreme uncertainty that's being created by the trade war that's being generated by the US administration at the moment. It's people need certainty. You need to know what's happening in say 5 years' time, and if you feel that the rules are changing every 5 minutes, that's not going to help you, because it's a long-term industry. Anything you start up doing now will have an impact in 5 years. I mean, development times are long, and even transfers of manufacturing are long. Registering products takes a long time. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, the sort of like uncertainty that we live in now actually might have impacts down the line, just due to decisions that we're making.
There are two completely different things. I mean, the industry, which it's not a fast-moving sort of thing because of all the regulatory pressure and the difficulty of manufacturing and God knows all of that, versus the chaotic changes in trade relations and in trade conditions. So that creates a bit of a tension, I would say.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I think we all hope to lose the in uncertainty and have a little bit more of a certain future at some point. Let's switch gears a little bit. High potency APIs, they're used to set certain CDMOs apart from the competition, a bit of a competitive advantage. Is that still the case, would you say?
If you go back, say, 5-10 years, or even a bit longer, being able to produce high-potency APIs was really setting you apart as a CDMO. Obviously, the number of high-potency APIs in the market is increasing, is still increasing, has increased over the years for all the good reasons. And now, many CDMOs are able to actually produce high-potency APIs. So the thing to be seen, what you see now, what sets companies apart, is being able to do high-potency APIs in combination with something else, in combination with, say, cytotoxic fermentation, or with controlled drugs, or high-potency APIs. They're often used as part of an ADC, antibody drug conjugate. In order to be able to do that, you need the antibody, but you need the linker to the API as well. These linkers, that's where some of the companies actually specialize in making these linkers for these high-potency APIs. And that then sort of sets them apart. It's high-potency APIs plus something else which is specific that now sets you apart and gives you benefit, I think.
Let's talk about ADCs for a minute. They're obviously a very exciting modality right now. Is the supply chain keeping pace with the pipeline?
Now, the short answer is probably no, not quite. I think there's room. Well, you see that actually happening. More people get involved in this. But it's not easy if you're a CDMO that's just involved in small molecules, and the whole ADC side of it is a lot more biological, which requires different approach, maybe even a different team of operators to do it, team of developers to develop it, because it's a lot closer to biology, to synthetic biology, to all the. So the techniques and technologies are different. So it takes a while to do that, and I think there's still room for more people to get into that side. Yeah.
So do you see that small molecule CDMOs are starting to expand into ADCs?
Yes, you see companies acquiring others that are in that, which obviously is a quick way of moving into an area rather than doing your development in-house, because that takes a long time, and you don't necessarily want that.
Do you see any other areas where CDMOs are sort of expanding in specific modalities, maybe to try and keep up with the market demand?
What you see, well, there's all sorts of technologies that are expanding into. CDMOs are also they have actually expanded into, say, solid state chemistry, where you test all sorts of polymorphs, crystalline forms for solid products, drug products, tablets that need to have a specific crystalline form, and testing that is a specialization in itself, and you do it at the very start to see if you can actually make a tablet or not. It's a requirement to test it from the regulator, because you can only really market the most active, the best polymorph. So what you've seen is that CDMOs have bought into that. That's still happening. So it's becoming more important. There's obviously a big trend towards producing in a more sustainable way. That's happening. That's happening in pharma as well. Only up till now, the vast majority is not moving that into the chemistry yet. You've got scope 1, 2, and 3. So they're all doing their scopes 1 and scope 2, which means you put solar panels on your roof, you set up a windmill or whatever. You get electric vehicles, all that sort of stuff. But it's doing it in the chemistry itself, obviously, is a lot more difficult. There are developments in that. There are CDMOs seriously looking into sustainable chemistry, as in the chemical technologies themselves. But it's difficult, and it's difficult for existing products, because if you've got a route and if you've got a plant that makes a certain product, you're not going to change that to. You can do all sorts of things that are happening at the moment, including solvent recycling. Although, mostly because it's a recycled solvent, you are not allowed to use it again in the pharma chain for GMP reasons. But you can at least use it in, I don't know, AgChem or in other areas of the chemical industry. So that's fine. But it's not the reactions themselves. Although companies are saying that they are moving into green chemistry, sustainable chemistry, and they often call it fermentations. That's fine. That's quite sustainable, but it's been around for a lot longer than this to do complicated chemistry and make molecules with multiple chiral centers. So it's been there for a different reason, and it's now, it's nice. It's a nice to have if you have it, because it certainly is sustainable. Although some fermentations are not as sustainable as you would think they are, but that's a different subject. So that's happening as well.
I see more and more pharma companies talking about scope 3 and just really trying to understand whether their CDMOs and the suppliers and their suppliers are on the sort of ESG spectrum.
Exactly.
Let's move on. There's a talent shortage in the chemistry side of this industry. How serious is it? Who's feeling it the most?
I think in general terms, there might be a talent shortness in lots of industries because of the population pyramid, if you like. There's lots of people are getting old and getting out of the industry. So it needs to be replenished, replaced by younger people. I think the key areas at the moment seem to be analytical services, analytical departments of companies, which are actually, you need a lot of that in the pharma industry to support that you're doing the right thing and to get proof of that. There seems to be every now and again. I think there's a shortage in business development people, and people that know. If you're doing business development in the pharma industry, you need to at least have the right background. You need to be able to talk chemistry, if you like, or at least understand what your partner is talking about, which makes it maybe different from business development in window glass or whatever. I'm not saying that's easy, but this needs specific
highly
requirements.
specialised.
It's more specialised. I think in terms of chemists, that maybe you hear talk of shortages there as well.
I used to work in the clinical diagnostics industry. There was a lot of talk about a talent shortage there as well. There is quite a lot of associations I spoke to trying to really engage with young people, with students, to try and sort of increase the funnel of the talent that was entering the industry. Do you see how we can fill these talent gaps?
Engaging with students, with younger people is the thing to do. And, to be honest, the chemical industry, which basically it is, hasn't always had the right appeal, because people associate it with pipes and plumes and God knows what, which of course is may have been true in the past, and is maybe still true for parts of the industry. Specifically, this type is really high tech. We need it if we want to get our medicines. We need it in other areas of the chemical industry as well, because anything, if you look around this room, there's not a lot that doesn't involve chemistry. Actually, I challenge anyone to point out a single thing that doesn't involve chemistry. So it needs to be made more attractive. It needs to be made more appealing, more, and get people into the industry, show them around, show them what wonderful things have been done. And of course there have been mistakes in the past and disasters and what have you, but join us and make sure it doesn't happen again.
The chemical industry needs a rebrand. Let's talk about your consultancy a bit before we close up. When a company comes to you for a strategy review, what's the question they're most often trying to answer?
Many companies are doing a strategy review every so often, every couple of years, because they feel they have to look at things, at the market again, at their positioning again, at what's happening again. So a lot of that revolves around that. What's the current status of the industry? They want to get an outside view. They'll look at it from inside, but it's always, if you're doing a strategy review, it's always good to have somebody from outside to point out certain things, or to confront you with your own beliefs. I mean, I've been in the same position. I was for DSM. We used to do that there, and they always used to involve outside consultants who would make you realize that, hey, I've maybe not seen this right, or so that's often the question, to look at the product portfolio, look at the technology portfolio, look at what's happening in the market, and how they are, criticize everything they're doing from in a positive way, not try and burn them down, because that generates the thought process, and then lock yourself into the room with the management team plus some other people that know, that have some input. That's what usually happens, in my case anyway.
And looking at the market as a whole, APIs, fine chemicals, what do you think most often gets misread by companies, investors, or the press in general?
That's a good question. It's I think what often gets misread is the popularity of certain or the uniqueness of certain technologies. And if you look over the years, in 20 years ago, all of a sudden, every company needed to have chiral technologies to make chiral molecules. True, you still need it. But then, there was even one company that started up that did only chiral chemistry, that's great, but it doesn't work, because you need all the others as well. So trying not to run down a rabbit hole, if you like, or run down a certain thing. And, it's similar to what's happening, has been happening for a couple of years about continuous manufacturing in fine chemicals. It's a great tool to have, but it's not the thing that solves it all, that solves all the problems, or that you can, because sometimes it's it's better or just as good to have a non-continuous step in between, because it's because of the technology or the chemistry involved. So make sure that you don't focus on one technology or one thing at the same time. This is what tends to happen every now and again, where people get too much carried away with the opportunities and the possibilities. And in case of continuous manufacturing, they're great. The options are fantastic, and it makes it more sustainable, and you've got low risk, and it's got a lot of benefits, but it's not the single solution for every single problem. Be careful for that. And from another point of view, people sometimes have thought that the pharma-related industry is an extremely profitable industry, and they got involved, and they got disappointed because I'm not saying they're losing money, but it's not the extreme profitabilities that people often think. So that's the sort of things.
That must be hard though in practice. I mean, when you at conferences or a lot online, hearing the sort of industry hype around, for example, continuous manufacturing. Yeah. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff, for lack of a better term? How do you listen to industry noise, keep your finger on the pulse, but also kind of have a clear head of actually this might be hype, or there actually might be something there?
Yeah, well, that's not always easy, and it's an easy trap to fall into, if you like. But I try and view it from different viewpoints. I talk to people and get their opinion, and doing it that way, you get some people saying, well, yeah, it's great, but you need so and so, and I'm not saying that I've never fallen for something like that, but I try and put it and get all the hype stuff out of it and look at the bare facts and how things like that developed in the past. It's a bit gut feeling, I guess, as well, which I maybe developed over the years.
Follow your gut. Good advice. So finally, what will the API market look like in 2030?
It'll be similar to now, I think. The share of biologicals will have probably grown. There will still be a lot of small molecules, because if you look at, as we touched on that before, 52% of what's in the pipeline is still small molecules. The attrition rate across the pipeline is similar for both biologicals and small molecules. So that means that, given the development time of 10 to 15 years, that in 10 years' time, let's say, the split between small molecules and biologicals is still going to be roughly the same in terms of numbers of products. I'm not talking about sales. So that means that there's still room for CDMOs. Outsourcing is not 100%, but it's growing, and that'll keep on growing because of things getting more difficult, and that's across both areas, both small molecules and biologicals. So it gets more difficult. It's easy. It's better to have it done by somebody that's specialized in that. So, and that's increasing, and will keep increasing in future. So the outsourcing rate, percentage, will keep growing. So the CDMO market in itself, the accessible market for the CDMOs is growing at a higher rate than the general pharma market.
Yeah, thanks a lot for sharing your insights today and sitting down to talk to me.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.